Hello and welcome to another Magic the Gathering sealed deck building exercise. Today we're taking a look at the Eldritch Moon expansion, and the sealed format here is 4 Eldritch Moon boosters and 2 Shadows over Innistrad boosters. So we're going to open them and then try and build some sealed pools and go from there. So let's get started let's keep it exciting here and start with the older cards from Shadows over Innistrad. So when we open the cards, we'll sort them by color, and that will make it easier to then build the deck later. So let's zoom in on the cards and get started with Emissary of the Sleepless, Sleep Paralysis, Stern Constable, Gone Missing, Moldgraph Scavenger, Clip Wings, Farbog Revenant, a Rush of Adrenaline, Quilled Wolf, Broken Concentration, Nahiri's Machinations, a Woodland Stream, and our rare is a Forgotten Creation. And our flip card is a Kindly Stranger that transforms into Demon Possessed Witch. Alright, on to the second Shadows over Innistrad booster. Where we lead things off with a Deny Existence, a Devilthorn Fox, Furtive Homunculus, Strength of Arms, Stormkirk Mentor, or Stromkirk Mentor rather, always get those mixed up, Tormenting Voice, a Root Out, Rotten Heart Ghoul, Reduce to Ashes, a Runaway Carriage, a Gibbering Fiend, Griff's Boon, and our rare is an Angel of Deliverance. And our flip card is a Lamphold Pacifist, which transforms into a Lamphold Butcher. Alright, on to Eldritch Moon. Where we have a Take Inventory, and Desperate Sentry, Skursdag Supplicant, Crossroads Consecrator, Borrowed Hostility, Thraben Standard Bearer, Cathar's Shield, Exultant Cultist, Mockery of Nature, A Long Road Home, Somberwald Stag, and our rare is a Nahiri's Wrath, which is pretty exciting in sealed. And we even get a Smoldering Werewolf, which is a pretty powerful flip card, which transforms into Erupting Dreadwolf. And we already got a sneak peek of our next card, which is a foil Imprisoned in the Moon. So that's nice and shiny, and also a decent card. Alright. So a pretty awesome first pack. Next up we have an Ingenious Scab, Choking Restraints, Spring Sage Ritual, Wolfkin Bond, Succumb to Temptation, Prophetic Ravings, Lunarch Mantle, Fogwalker, another Borrowed Hostility, Nephalia Academy, Rise from the Grave, a Markov Crusader, and our rare is a Soul Separator, which has a lot of text. And our flip card is a Conduit of Storms, which transforms into Conduit of Emrakul. Alright. On to booster number 5 and our third Eldritch Moon booster. Get things started with a Drag Under, a Borrowed Grace, Otherworldly Outburst, Weirded Vampire, Iron Rites Cleansing, Displace, Terrarion, Bold Impaler, Thirsting Axe, Insatiable Gorgers, Dusk Feaster, and our rare is a Bloodhall Priest. And our flip card is an Ulvenwald Captive, which transforms into Ulvenwald Abomination. And we even get a foil Borrowed Grace, which is also nice and shiny. Alright, on to our last pack. Where we have a Prey Upon, Waxing Moon, another Borrowed Grace, Bloodbriar, a Wailing Ghoul, another Prophetic Ravings, Thraben Standardbearer, another Exultant Cultist, another Borrowed Hostility, that's the third one, Fury Blade Vampire is our first uncommon, followed by another Dusk Feaster, and a Crop Sigil, and our last rare is a Mausoleum Wanderer. And our last transform card is another Ulvenwald Captive. Alright, well, let's get to deck building. First things first, I like to just go quickly through every color to see how many playable cards there are, how many great cards there are, because some cards might be playable but are not really that exciting. So let's get started with white here. So Borrowed Grace certainly playable in especially more aggressive decks. We've got two Standard Bearers here, which is not really that exciting. I'm seeing here that we don't actually have a ton of great creatures. Iron Rites Cleansing is more of a sideboard card. Lunarch Mantle goes well into an aggressive deck, but you don't always want that, especially in sealed. Choking Restraints is pretty great. Long Road Home I'm not really interested in. Desperate Sentry can be decent. Angel of Deliverance can be a win condition, but it's a lot harder in this sealed environment to enable Delirium, since you don't have as many enablers as you did in Shadows over Innistrad. Griffspoon also goes well into an aggressive deck. Strength of Arms, a nice combat trick. Devilthorn Fox is kind of our first playable creature, I would say. Nahiri's Machinations would be decent in a red-white aggressive deck, but aggressive decks usually don't really come about in sealed, since you need a lot of cheap creatures and you only get so many. Stern Constable, also not the best card. Emissary of Sleepless is certainly playable, but if we take a look at white, we basically don't have any creatures I would like to play. I mean, Devilthorn Fox is certainly playable, but not really exciting, and well, I guess Desperate Sentry could make it. But we have a lot of combat tricks and enchantments, but just not enough creatures to support those. So I'm not really feeling the white cards here. Maybe Choking Restraints could be a splash card just because it's a decent removal spell. So let's move on to blue. Mausoleum Wanderer, not really an excellent card in sealed unless you have a ton of spirits. Exultant Cultist goes well into the Emerge style decks, since you get some value when you sacrifice him. Displace is not really a card I'm looking to play. Dragoner is solid. Fogwalker is mediocre. Ingenious Scab is solid. Imprisoned in the Moon is solid. Another Exultant Cultist. Take Inventory I'm not gonna play unless I have like 3 or 4. Furtive Homunculus, not that exciting. Deny Existence gets a bit better in sealed than in draft, but still not exciting. Forgotten Creation is decent. Broken Concentration is a bit better than the Deny Existence, but still don't really want to play counterspells unless your opponent has some unbeatable cards that you can't deal with otherwise. Gone Missing, solid removal. Sleep Paralysis, also solid removal. So blue is looking a bit better, but still very few creatures. Just the 2 Exultant Cultists and the Ingenious Scab, and I guess the Forgotten Creation. So we've got 4 creatures here, then 3 decent removal cards, then a 4th one I wouldn't mind playing, but still not a super deep color if we take a look at all of it. A lot of cards that I wouldn't really want to play, and then very few creatures here. So maybe blue can be a support color if another color is a lot deeper, but we'll see. Then we have black, where we have 2 Dusk Feasters, which without Delirium is a little bit expensive, although in sealed you are afforded a little more time to get up to 7 mana, so I could see playing maybe one of them if I don't have a dedicated Delirium deck just as a finisher, but 2 is kind of stretching it. Weirded Vampire is playable if you have some Madness outlets especially, or ways to discard cards for value. Then Wailing Ghoul, we don't seem to have a lot of graveyard synergies here. Mark of Crusader can be decent if we have some vampires, but even without vampires it's still a playable card. Rise from the Grave is playable certainly. Succumb to Temptation is a bit slow in draft, since paying 2 life and spending 3 mana to draw 2 cards is not generally where you want to be, but in sealed again you have a little more time and the card advantage could matter, so I could see playing this in sealed. Scursdag Supplicant is a solid 3-drop, also gives you a way to discard cards, so you can surprise people with a weirded vampire during the combat, for example. Rotten Heart Ghoul, not really that exciting. The Mentor without many vampires is not that great. Kindly Stranger, we don't really seem to have a lot of Delirium enablers, so it's not looking too exciting. And Revenant is also just middle of the pack kind of card. So black, also not looking very exciting. We basically don't have any removal spells unless you count the Kindly Stranger, which is a bit of an exception here, but yeah, black also doesn't look that great. So hopefully red and green have some more cards to offer. And red has a lot of Borrowed Hostilities, which I don't know if I like that much. I mean, it's a playable combat trick if you're an aggressive deck, but doesn't strike me as a particularly powerful card. We've got this Prophetic Ravings ×2, which is not a card I want to play. Insatiable Gorgers is solid. Bold Impaler is pretty bad. Otherworldly Outburst is also not a card I'm looking to play. And Conduit is solid. The Smoldering Werewolf is very strong. And here, Nahiri's Wrath. This card is pretty insane in sealed. You can easily wipe the opponent's board just by discarding 1 or 2 cards, and that's a pretty easy way to win a game of limited. So definitely want to be in red just to be able to play Nahiri's Wrath. Jeering Fiend is solid. Reduce to Ashes is decent removal, although a bit slow. Tormenting Voice is just good filler. Rush of Adrenaline maybe could make it, but probably not. And then Fury Blade Vampire if we have a lot of Madness cards. But even without it, it's not terrible, but we'll see. So red has a lot more cards I'm excited to play. It's got some decent creatures with the werewolves here, and Nahiri's Wrath mainly, plus Reduce to Ashes as removal. So yeah, red could be a support color, but still not very deep. We're only talking about 8 or 9 cards here. So hopefully green is a little deeper. So let's move on to green, where we have Ulvenwald Captives ×2, which is a pretty great card since it ramps you and then gives you something to do in the late game when you can transform them. Crop Sigil is a Delirium enabler, but it's a pretty slow one and not one I'm excited to play. Bloodbriar has a lot of surprising synergies with ways you can sacrifice your permanents. If you have some clues you can sacrifice, he gets pretty big. So it's certainly a card I'm willing to play here. Waxing Moon, we do have some werewolves, but I think you need like at least 6 or 7 of them before this really becomes worth it. Prey Upon, always solid. Wolfkin Bonds is playable. The Ritual, more of a sideboard card. The Stag is certainly exciting. Mockery of Nature, kind of depends how your curve looks like, but I could see playing this one. The Consecrator, only really in a human deck. The Pacifists, yeah, I could see playing this one, especially if people now play less 2-drops, because there's less of these kinds of werewolves in the format, so people are less incentivized to play 2-drops. So that makes the 2-drops that you do get from Shadows over Innistrad that much better, because they're more likely to transform when you play them on turn 2. Root Out, more of a sideboard card. Quilt Wolf, solid. Clipwings, it's a bit risky to main deck it, since not all decks will have flyers, but a very solid sideboard card. And a Scavenger, not great without Delirium. And as we've seen, we only have one real Delirium enabler, so I'm not really interested in the Delirium cards here. But green definitely looks like our best color, I would say, at least from the commons and uncommons. Doesn't have any bomb rares like Nahiri's Wrath, but still looks very solid. Then the lands, we have a Woodland Stream and a Nephalia Academy, so the Woodland Stream can maybe enable a splash or 2. And then artifacts, we have the Runaway Carriage, which I'm not really interested in. Cathar's Shield, not really interested in. Soul Separator, a bit too expensive for what it does. Terrarion is just a good filler card, can fix your mana, maybe enable a splash. And then the Thirsting Axe I'm also not really willing to play. So yeah, we have some ways to splash blue or green here with Terrarion and Woodland Stream, so we can look out for those. And then finally one multicolor card in the Bloodhall Priest. So if we're red-black, I could see playing this, but we don't look to have an easy way to splash black or red if those aren't our main colors, so who knows, maybe we can fit her in somehow. Alright, so now that we've looked at our colors, I think it's pretty clear that our main colors are probably gonna be green and red, but we're gonna try and build the deck, see how the curve looks like, and then maybe make some adjustments, see if perhaps other colors fit in better with one of these color combinations, and yeah, go from there. So I'll see you back in a bit. Alright, welcome back. So as you can see, red and green didn't really have enough cards to build a good sealed deck, so we already had to resort to our blue splash, but thanks to Terrarion and Woodland Stream, it should be feasible to splash at least 2 blue cards pretty easily. So the ones we're splashing are Imprisoned in the Moon and Sleep Paralysis, which are basically 2 removal spells. And removal spells like these ones that are unconditional basically are pretty good options for splash cards, because even if you only find your blue mana later in the game, they're still pretty effective even when you're behind on board. So I like the blue cards in the deck. Then for other removal options, we have Reduce to Ashes, of course Nahiri's Wrath, which is also pretty great if you have a bunch of Emerge creatures, because their converted mana cost is very high, so Nahiri's Wrath will deal a lot of damage. Then we have the Somberwald Stag, which can also take out a creature, of course. We have the Prey Upon, which with our big green and red creatures can also take out some sizable creatures. Then we have a few combat tricks here in Borrowed Hostility, which I think I prefer over the alternative, which would be Rush of Adrenaline, just because at least the Borrowed Hostility has the Escalate ability, so in the late game we can get a bit more value out of it than the Rush of Adrenaline, although there are arguments for playing the Rush of Adrenaline because it gives our creatures trample, and if we can give one of our high-powered creatures trample, we can get in for a lot of damage. But overall, I think I prefer the Borrowed Hostility here, and I don't think I want both of them, since you don't really want too many combat tricks in this kind of deck. And then we also have Waxing Moon, because we do have a decent amount of werewolves here. We have the Lampold Pacifist, 2 Ulvenwald Captives, Conduit of Storms, and Smoldering Werewolf. So even if we get to transform just one of those creatures in the early game, I think we get our value from the Waxing Moon. And then of course it also gives our creatures trample. So another reason to prefer the Borrowed Hostility over the Rush of Adrenaline, since we already have a trample effect with Waxing Moon here. So I think it's worth including it. And then we also have Tormenting Voice here, just to smooth out our draw bit. Same with Terrarion, can be used to find our blue mana, but can also just be used to cycle it. And we do have a Bloodbriar in the deck, so if we sacrifice Terrarion, then he will get a +1/+1 counter, so that's pretty sweet. Then if we take a look at our 2-drops, we have some pretty aggressive ones, like the Gibbering Fiend, the Fury Blade Vampire, which we're probably mostly going to be discarding excess lands to the Fury Blade Vampire. I also think this deck could get away with playing 18 lands, because we do have a lot of mana sinks with all the werewolves that we can put a lot of mana into, and then if we do happen to draw too many lands, we can still just discard them to the Fury Blade Vampire to deal a bit of extra damage. We can also discard them with Nahiri's Wrath if we need to deal more damage to more creatures. And then of course the 2 Ulvenwald Captives, which are pretty awesome, since they ramp us into our late game and can also be used to ramp themselves when you want to activate the 7 mana ability here, which gives us a nice 4/6 that also can produce some nice generic mana. So happy to have 2 of these. And then the Lampold Pacifist, and it shouldn't be too difficult to have a 4-powered creature in play to be able to attack with the Pacifist, or we can of course just transform her, and that's a nice 4/4. And then we also have the Quilled Wolf, which is yet another mana sink. So we do have a lot of mana sinks in this deck, so this one costs 6 mana to get +4/+4, and is also just a solid 2-drop. And then moving up the curve, we already talked about the Bloodbriar. We have the Conduit of Storms, which is another werewolf that can add more mana to our mana pool. And then we have the Insatiable Gorgers, which is a nice aggressive card, also has Madness. So if we can discard it to the Fury Blade Vampire or the Nahiri's Wrath, we could get some value, although it's kind of a stretch with Nahiri's Wrath because we would need a lot of mana to pull that off. And then we also have the Smoldering Werewolf, which may be one of the best uncommons in Eldritch Moon, since he can take out multiple creatures just by himself. 1 damage to each of up to 2 target creatures when he enters a battlefield, and then even more damage when he transforms. And then the Somberwald Stag, already discussed, pretty strong card. And then 1 copy of Mockery of Nature, just to have a little bit more punch in the late game, can take out a random artifact or enchantment. There are a decent amount of pacifism-like enchantments that we could take out with the Mockery, or we could just sacrifice a creature that's maybe enchanted. So lots of options there. And we do have a decent amount of expensive creatures that we could sacrifice. For example, an Insatiable Gorgers. If there's a board state where it has to attack but wouldn't be able to attack profitably, we can maybe just sacrifice it to the Mockery of Nature to emerge it. Or we could just get up to 9 mana with the Ulvenwald Captives ramping us and the Conduit of Storms ramping us. So I think playing 18 lands in this build might be correct. Otherwise, we could play maybe one more blue card. We could play a Drag Under, which is not really that exciting if you cast it later in the game, because then the effect of bouncing a creature is a lot less impactful. We could play a Forgotten Creation, but that also doesn't seem too exciting here with very few Madness cards. And Gone Missing is kind of the same as Drag Under, so it doesn't really strike me as a card I'm willing to splash. So I think playing 18 lands here is good. And I would probably play 2 islands to go with the Woodland Stream and the Terrarion. That way we can pretty reliably cast our Imprisoned in the Moon and Sleep Paralysis. And then the split between red and green should be pretty even. So yeah, that's the deck. I don't think there are any other realistic builds available since white had no creatures. Black didn't have any removal spells, and the creatures also weren't that exciting. And then, well, red and green we covered, and then blue, besides the cards we discussed, only really had the Cultists and the Ingenious Scab, which are not really cards that you want to be splashing. So yeah, I think that's gonna do it for this sealed deck building exercise. Only one build this time around, but that can happen. Some sealed pools are a bit weaker than others. This one I think is reasonable. The werewolves do make it a lot stronger than it would otherwise have been. And of course Nahiri's Wrath can randomly win you a game. So yeah, I want to thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. And as always, have a nice day.